Hollywood has seen friendships end, careers collapse, and secrets explode. But this story stayed locked away for decades until death finally removed the fear. When Mel Brooks spoke about Rob Reiner after everything was already over, his words did not sound angry or dramatic. They sounded honest, and that honesty hit Hollywood harder than any scandal ever could. For decades, Mel Brooks and Rob Reiner were spoken about as if they belonged to the same untouchable circle of Hollywood legends, men whose names represented intelligence, humor, and creative power that shaped how generations understood comedy and storytelling. To the public, their connection looked natural and respectful, almost like fate had placed them on the same path, working in the same industry with the same love for satire and bold ideas. Mel Brooks was not just successful, he was foundational, a man who built his reputation from the ground up when comedy was risky, political, and often punished rather than celebrated. He fought through rejection, criticism, and fear, learning early that survival in Hollywood required both talent and emotional strength, lessons that stayed with him long after fame arrived. Rob Reiner entered Hollywood under very different circumstances, surrounded by opportunity, recognition, and doors that opened more easily because of family, timing, and the world he was born into. While Rob was intelligent and capable, his journey did not carry the same scars, and that difference would quietly shape how both men viewed success, loyalty, and responsibility. In the early years, Mel Brooks genuinely admired Rob Reiner's energy and ambition, seeing in him someone who respected comedy not as shallow entertainment, but as a powerful voice that could challenge authority and culture. Mel offered guidance freely, sharing wisdom earned through painful experience, never imagining that one day this generosity would leave him feeling emotionally invisible. Their relationship developed naturally, not through contracts or formal mentorship, but through trust built in private conversations, shared laughter, and moments where Mel defended Rob's creative choices when others doubted him. Those early bonds felt real, not transactional, and Mel believed that mutual respect would last longer than fame itself. As Rob Reiner's career gained momentum, the industry began treating him differently, placing him in rooms where decisions were made, opinions mattered, and influence replaced humility. Mel watched this transformation quietly, noticing subtle shifts in behavior that were easy to ignore but impossible to unsee once they added up. At first, it was small things, shorter conversations, delayed responses, and meetings that felt rushed or distracted, signs that priorities were changing. Mel did not confront Rob about it because he understood how pressure and responsibility could temporarily distort behavior, and he believed patience was an act of respect. Hollywood, however, does not slow down for reflection. Success accelerates ego, and as Rob Reiner's power increased, so did his confidence in his own voice, opinions, and authority. Mel noticed that collaboration was slowly being replaced by control, and dialogue was turning into declaration. What hurt Mel most was not disagreement, but erasure. Ideas that were once discussed openly were now dismissed quickly, and contributions that once mattered seemed to disappear into silence. Mel felt like a chapter being closed rather than a voice being valued. Despite these changes, Mel Brooks chose silence. He believed that publicly addressing personal disappointment would damage more than it healed, and he refused to weaponize his legacy against someone he once believed in. That choice came from dignity, but it came at a personal cost. As years passed, Rob Reiner's public image grew louder and sharper, especially in spaces where power, politics, and media collided. Mel observed from a distance, recognizing that Rob no longer needed approval, guidance, or accountability from anyone who came before him. Hollywood rewarded this transformation. Studios trusted Rob's authority, media amplified his voice, and criticism became rare. In an industry driven by relevance, Mel understood that challenging Rob publicly would position him as an obstacle rather than a truth teller. Privately, Mel carried disappointment that deepened with time. He questioned whether silence was protecting the wrong person, whether loyalty was being mistaken for weakness, and whether dignity was quietly becoming self-erasure. Friends noticed the distance but avoided asking questions. Hollywood thrives on comfort, and uncomfortable truths threaten careers. It was easier to celebrate success than to examine how it was achieved or who was left behind. Mel Brooks had seen this pattern before. Careers built on collaborations slowly rewritten as solo achievements. History in Hollywood often forgets mentors once the spotlight narrows, and Mel feared he had allowed himself to become invisible by refusing to speak. What made the situation more painful was that Mel never denied Rob's talent. He never believed Rob was undeserving of success. His pain came from the belief that success should deepen character, not flatten it. Mel began reflecting on moments where he could have spoken earlier, set boundaries, or demanded accountability. Each reflection carried regret, not anger, but sadness that honesty had been delayed for the sake of peace that never truly existed. As time passed, silence hardened into habit. Mel continued working, joking, and appearing publicly unbothered, while privately feeling disconnected from a story he helped shape. The industry praised unity that no longer existed. Rob Reiner, meanwhile, moved confidently forward, rarely acknowledging the shoulders he once stood on. Whether intentional or not, this absence spoke louder than confrontation ever could. Mel understood that confrontation would not restore what was lost. Respect, once damaged, cannot be forced back into existence. The only thing left was truth, and even truth needed the right moment to surface. That moment did not come during success, applause, or awards. It arrived quietly, after death altered the balance of power and removed fear from the equation. Only then did Mel feel free enough to speak without consequences overshadowing honesty. When Mel finally broke his silence, he did not frame himself as a victim. He spoke as a witness to change, a mentor watching values erode under the weight of influence and recognition. He described a gradual emotional separation, not a dramatic betrayal. His words carried disappointment rather than rage, which made them impossible to dismiss as jealousy or bitterness. Hollywood was stunned not by what he said, but by how long he waited to say it. The delay forced people to question how many other truths remained buried beneath polite silence. Mel Brooks revealed that silence had protected Rob more than it protected himself, and that choosing dignity over honesty had come with a personal emotional cost he could never fully recover. For the first time, the public saw a different side of Rob Reiner's rise, one that included emotional distance, selective loyalty, and power that reshaped relationships rather than strengthening them. This chapter of the story is not about villains or heroes. It is about how fame alters dynamics, how silence becomes survival, and how truth waits patiently for fear to disappear. Mel Brooks did not seek apology, revenge, or validation. He simply allowed honesty to exist, believing that truth spoken calmly holds more power than accusations shouted in anger. And as Hollywood absorbed his words, one thing became clear. Silence can protect careers, but it can also erase relationships. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is speaking when there is nothing left to gain. When Mel Brooks finally broke his silence, Hollywood did not react the way it usually does to controversy, because this was not loud, aggressive, or filled with accusations. His words arrived slowly, calmly, and with the weight of someone who had carried the truth for far too long, and that calm honesty made people uncomfortable in a way scandals never do. Many expected anger, but Mel spoke with reflection instead. He explained that his disappointment was not born from one moment or one argument, but from years of watching respect slowly fade as power grew stronger than gratitude. This made his truth harder to dismiss because it sounded familiar to anyone who had ever been left behind after helping someone succeed. The industry struggled to respond because Mel Brooks was not someone easily labeled as bitter or jealous. His career was secure, his legacy unshakable, and his voice respected across generations. That credibility forced Hollywood to listen instead of deflect. As Mel's words spread, private conversations began happening behind closed doors. People who had worked closely with Rob Reiner started sharing experiences that echoed Mel's feelings, describing shifts in behavior, distance in communication, and a sense that loyalty became optional once success was guaranteed. These stories were not dramatic, but they were consistent. They spoke of meetings where voices were ignored, relationships reduced to convenience, and a growing belief that influence justified emotional detachment. Together, they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. Mel made it clear that his silence had never been about fear of Rob Reiner. It was about fear of damaging the larger creative community he loved. He believed public conflict between legends would harm younger creators who still needed guidance and protection. However, with time, Mel realized that silence also sends a message. It tells people that behavior has no consequences and that power can rewrite history without challenge. This realization stayed with him long after he stopped expecting anything to change. One of the most striking parts of Mel's reflection was his admission of regret. He acknowledged that by staying silent, he allowed himself to be emotionally erased, turning dignity into quiet suffering that no one ever saw. Hollywood often celebrates restraint, but Mel questioned whether restraint without honesty becomes self-betrayal. He explained that protecting others should never require destroying your own truth, a lesson he learned far later than he wished. Rob Reiner's defenders focused on his achievements, awards, and cultural impact, but Mel never challenged those accomplishments. He separated talent from character, insisting that success does not excuse neglecting the people who helped build it. This distinction mattered deeply. It reframed the conversation away from rivalry and toward accountability. Mel was not rewriting history, he was completing it. As younger creators listened, many saw themselves in Mel's story. They understood how mentorship can quietly turn into imbalance, and how speaking up too early risks everything, while speaking too late risks peace. Mel Brooks also addressed the emotional toll of waiting. He described how silence slowly reshapes memory, making moments of respect feel smaller and moments of disappointment feel heavier with each passing year. He spoke about nights spent questioning whether honesty would have changed anything, or whether power had already sealed the outcome. Those reflections were not meant to inspire pity, but awareness. Hollywood rarely pauses to examine emotional consequences. It rewards productivity, relevance, and obedience to image. Mel's words forced the industry to confront the cost of those priorities. Rob Reiner's public image did not collapse overnight. Instead, it shifted quietly. Conversations became more cautious, admiration became more complicated, and certainty was replaced with curiosity. That shift mattered more than outrage ever could. It reminded Hollywood that legacies are shaped not only by work, but by how people treat those who stand beside them before success arrives. Mel did not ask for reconciliation. He understood that some distances cannot be closed once time has passed. His goal was never restoration, only truth. By choosing to speak when there was nothing left to gain, Mel Brooks removed doubt about his intention. He was not protecting a career or building a narrative. He was closing a chapter that had remained open for too long. The silence that followed his words felt different from the silence that came before. This time, it was chosen, not imposed. It carried peace instead of regret. Hollywood learned an uncomfortable lesson from this moment. Silence can protect power, but it also preserves harm. Breaking it does not always destroy. Sometimes it clarifies. Mel Brooks reminded the industry that respect is not permanent. It must be maintained. And when it disappears, pretending otherwise only deepens the loss. This story was never meant to humiliate Rob Reiner or erase his accomplishments. It was meant to show how unchecked influence can distort relationships and rewrite loyalty without permission. In the end, Mel Brooks did what many never find the courage to do. He spoke the truth when fear no longer controlled him, and in doing so, he reclaimed a part of himself that silence had quietly taken away. Hollywood moved on, as it always does, but the story stayed. It lingered in conversations, reflections, and unspoken realizations about power, memory, and accountability. And for those who listen closely, Mel Brooks left behind a warning that will outlive both controversy and applause. Success reveals character, silence hides pain, and truth, no matter how late, always finds its moment to be heard.